Hi, I'm John Behrens, professor of the practice and director of the Technology and Digital Studies program at the University of Notre Dame. I'm here with some of our students that are involved in the new AI project outreach program, and we're going to be talking to you about the latest things going on with AI and technology in the world today. I'll start by having each of our participants introduce themselves. Graham Wolf is the overall editor of the new AI project, and we'll ask Graham to introduce himself.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here. My name is Graham Wolf, and as Dr. Behrens said, I am the primary editor of the New AI Project's publications. Recently, I've been helping lead this team of writers and researchers here this semester and the last, and help them explore their interests in the various domains of AI and further our mission of sharing the journey of discovering AI and how that will affect every one of us in our world, sharing that journey with the rest of the Notre Dame community and beyond.
Great. Thanks so much, Graham. Next, I want to introduce Aidan Gilroy. Aidan, would you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Dr. Behrens, for having me on here. My name is Aidan Gilroy. I'm the lead writer for Tech Titans, a piece in the monthly publication where we cover all that's happening among the major players in AI, everything from OpenAI to Anthropic and Gemini. I've also recently been researching all that's happening in the AI user interface, the evolution of that since it came out about 2 or 3 years ago now.
Great. Thank you. Our next presenter is Claire Hill. Claire, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Claire Hill, and I write the Taming AI section of our newsletter. So I talk about the ethics and governance of AI. Most recently, I've been thinking about how AI had the potential to impact our recent presidential election, and then reciprocally, how the results of of that election will impact the governance around AI.
Great. Thanks so much. And then our last, but certainly not least participant is Mary Claire Anderson. Mary Claire, would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Mary Claire Anderson, and I write the AI and Life section for our monthly blog. This section looks at how AI is shaping day to day lifestyles and societies. Most recently, I've been looking at the environmental impacts of AI and how AI is impacting sustainability goals for both individuals and companies across the world.
Thanks for the introductions, everybody. I'd like to start by talking about the ChatGPT anniversary. We just had the second anniversary of ChatGPT. The explosion really started 2 years ago when ChatGPT hit the scene. So I'm going to start by asking each of you for a little bit of a reflection about what has changed in the world from your perspective in these last 2 years, whether it's something personal or an observation or something in your research. We're going to start with Aiden, since Aiden has written about this topic in his part of the blog this month. Aiden, can you kick us off with some reflections about how things have changed in the last 2 years since ChatGPT first started?
You see this mainly in the classroom. For different assignments, there's a heightened degree of skepticism from professors of whether students have actually written these assignments. You see it when people are trying to pay attention in class and are rushing to do last minute assignments and they're just putting everything in ChatGPT and having an output, a response for them. And so my big fear recently, as ChatGPT increases its capabilities, has been around whether or not students are actually going to be thinking. I think that's a justifiable fear given my experience seeing it widespread in classrooms among my peers.
Okay, so issues around trust, both between teachers and professors. What's the nature of work and what's the nature of appropriateness in the classroom? And I assume that's going to lead to issues around trust as well from student to student. If I'm staying up all night, working hard, and you're getting up at the last minute and asking ChatGPT to do your work, could lead to all kinds of social conflict as well. Claire, tell me what some of your observations are about how things have changed the last 2 years.
Absolutely. It's a good question. The first thing I remember from 2 years ago when ChatGPT came out was sitting around with my friends asking it to write haikus about whatever we could think of and being shocked every time that it could do it. In the past 2 years, the novelty has worn off and it's become more of an everyday tool for the people that know how and when to use it. But I see it more now. It's less of a fun novelty technology and more of wow, it can make a really good study guide while I'm going on a trip. It can give me ideas of what I can do. I think it's become a lot more integrated into our everyday lives.
Mary Claire, you've written about how it's having second order impacts in society and the environment. What are some of the things that after 2 years you say, yeah, here's some big picture things going on?
One major story that I just wrote for our monthly blog was about AI companionship. This is a startling use of AI, in my opinion. Essentially, people are turning to AI to fill the role that humans once did, in the sense that they're using it to talk to these chatbots as they would a friend or a boyfriend. Some people even suggested a future where humans are marrying AI chatbots. That's something that to me is a little bit scary, just given that I don't think AI can fully replace human connection. But that's certainly 2 years ago, not really something we ever would have imagined, AI marriage. And as that continues to unfold and become a reality, I think it's interesting to see the implications of that.
Great comments about things that are really a struggle going on in society. Graham, you've been working with the new AI project the longest of this team. Can you tell me some of your observations and thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. First thing that comes to mind for me as a college student who is starting to look beyond post graduation is AI and the job market. Lots of folks, whether at our young adult age or later in their career, have experienced the impacts of artificial intelligence on hiring and recruiting and what it looks like to build a career. From my perspective, a lot of students who otherwise felt pretty insured by the fact that they would be receiving a degree and entering the job market in a predictable way now feel more set up to fail because of the uncertainty that has been infused into these formerly very concrete pipelines into industries. Now, of course, it's notable that this has been a very disparate impact across industries. As somebody pursuing a business, it's been a little scary, a little uncertain, and I've felt that feeling of being set up to fail. Contrast that with somebody like my sister who is getting a nursing degree. She has never used ChatGPT and has no familiarity with artificial intelligence, yet still feels 100% certain in her career path. Given that you raised that I've been here now for 2 years, flashing back to 2 years ago when I joined the team, just after ChatGPT hit the market, started this frenzy that we're still on. The work that we were doing here was very different. We could reasonably digest the entire news cycle of artificial intelligence each week that we were meeting and publish a very comprehensive digest every month. Now that's not the case at all. We can hardly keep up with 5 writers, and we've pivoted in various ways to try and digest the cycle differently. But it's really been pushed to the forefront of the public and social conscience in a way that is, similar to perhaps only the internet 30 years ago.
Yeah, so really big change continuing and having waves and waves of impact on different kinds of industries and professions. I think it's very interesting the example you give about nursing, where very little expectation of high impact from generative AI, maybe other kinds of AI, but generative AI in the short run, probably not there. And that impacts how people understand their role and security in the workforce. One of the things that's happened over these last 2 years is tremendous advances in the technologies. 2 years ago, it was just chat. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad, but the quality of the chats has evolved dramatically. The integration with all kinds of systems has evolved. Aiden, what are some of the more recent things that you've seen that you think our listeners should be aware of?
When these technologies first hit the scene, they were mainly focused on accumulating mass amounts of data and then producing somewhat of an okay summary. Now you see these technologies really focused on creating a really interesting and impactful user interface. Things like OpenAI's new Canvas feature, which allows you to input a prompt and then it'll produce an essay that you can then live edit when you're going back through, almost like editing a paper that you would with one of your friends, or Anthropic's artifacts feature that creates its own sidebar in the same place as the typical user interface that produces different graphs that you may need for your economics project, or a really good diagram that summarizes something you've written. You see these advents of new ways to keep users engaged with the content, but also better informed than just producing a summary. I think that's the way you're going to see moving forward with these companies, is really trying to create this good integrated relationship between AI and chatbot and human beings.
Yeah, and some of the examples you gave, like one of the things that I've benefited from is Anthropic's window on the side where I can tell it, I want you to make me a web page that does all these interactive things. And then the web page appears right there on the side, and I can have some interaction with it, know whether it's working or not right in real time. in a way that was the chatbot's the thing. And then if I have another system, it's another place. So we're seeing these integrations with ChatGPT where it will run the computer code and use that to solve math problems, economics, and physics problems. We're seeing this integration between different kinds of systems well beyond just the text chatbot. Where do you think some of the next steps are? Do you have any sense for where some of these companies might be going in the future?
Well, we recently heard about Anthropic's new computer use model, which is still in beta, but will potentially be the avenue that these models like OpenAI, like Gemini, like Anthropic go down. And what we saw in a lot of the testing and the footage from developers is a technology that when a user would input a prompt, it would take screenshots of the user's entire screen, and then it would actually move the mouse, go to a search engine, type in a question into the search engine. It could then open the user's calendar and type in a prompt. Say you want to plan a trip and you say, I need to budget for this trip. I don't know any sites to visit. I need to book a flight. And you get the possibilities of you just asking that question, giving the details, say, I want to go to Paris. And then it would do the rest. It would put things in your calendar, give you the most accurate and up to date prices on the cheapest flights. It could tell you the sites to go to. And so you get this integration from something that would typically take either hundreds of prompts or hours on your own without an AI. You get that with just one or two prompts, which is pretty incredible.
Sounds like we're moving in a direction of highly personal automation of lots of actions that can happen in the computer in addition to text. And just for a kind of a check with our listeners, I just want to do a little check on language. We talked about OpenAI, and just to be clear to our listeners, that's the company that makes ChatGPT. So the company is OpenAI, and the product is ChatGPT and its derivatives. We talked about Anthropic. Anthropic is a company that creates the Claude products that include some advanced features for replicating and automating. Who are some of the other companies that people might have heard of or might bump into their language model products?
Yeah, you also see Google. Google has their AI model, originally named Bard, if that is something you remember, but now it's called Gemini. Gemini is a pretty accurate and high level model on the same level as OpenAI's ChatGPT, as well as Anthropic's Claude. It can also search the internet, similar to OpenAI's model. And you also see Elon Musk's AI model, which is named Grok. And there's a couple other players, but those are the main players out there currently.
Great. That sounds like we've had an explosion of different large players getting into the field, going way beyond chatbots. As we started the conversation, we're 2 years into a larger revolution. Thanks for all that detail. And I just want to call out to everybody that Aiden's written about these in more detail in the blogs. Folks can follow up there. Graham, we also know that because of the kinds of things Aiden's been talking about, this leads to some second order impacts across society. Can you lead us in a conversation about what kind of impacts those new technological changes are leading to?
Yeah, absolutely. The team's done a lot of great work on talking about what you just called second order impacts, externalities, you can also think of them. They come in a couple different forms. What we touched on earlier, talking about the ways the world has changed over the past 2 years, are great examples. Those are more social examples. A big conversation that's been sparked recently and something that we're taking a look into here as a team is AI's impact on the environment and the technological second order impacts on different axes of sustainability. Mary Claire, you've been taking a closer look at this domain.
Yes.
So why don't you start us off? The premise here for us is artificial intelligence. Big tech companies are asking us to integrate AI into every facet of our life. On the flip side, climate scientists and the broad scientific consensus is compelling us to do the opposite and use less energy, less technology. I guess to start off broadly, do you see these two things as incompatible? If not, how can we maybe reconcile the tension between?
No, you're exactly right. I feel like we've already touched on throughout this podcast just some of the ways that we see AI making its way into every facet of human life. So I first want to briefly touch on the ways in which AI is negatively impacting the environment. My research is focused through four main ways. It's carbon impact, it's water usage, the e-waste that it generates, and its overall consumptive behaviors, like you touched on with that question, Graham. Ultimately, with its carbon footprint, AI does have a huge carbon footprint. Just to give some background statistics, a single ChatGPT query generates 10 times the CO2 of a traditional Google search. And as more people are turning to ChatGPT as a search engine, definitely an issue. At the same time, 60% of the EU electricity right now is generated through fossil fuels. That's increasing the overall carbon footprint of both the US and the world as more and more people are using AI. Training an AI model emits a ton of CO2, 626,000 pounds to be exact. These are definitely some costs we have to keep in mind. The water usage side of things, AI kind of data centers that host these AI models are expected to use up to 6.6 billion cubic meters of water withdrawal by 2027. Provide some context, that's 6 times the annual water consumption of Denmark in 2020. And then from an e-waste perspective, is expected to contribute up to 5 million tons of e-waste to the overall kind of global footprint by 2030, causing things like cancer and negatively impacting the soil. Last but not least, touching on that overall kind of consumption, the applications of AI are just driving overconsumption and a lot of facets of human life. If you look at things like targeted advertising on Instagram or TikTok, it's taking into account all of your data and recommending products that you might not necessarily need, but that it knows you might buy if you see it come up on your feed. And it's recommending these things, promoting things like fast fashion and overconsumption. At the end of the day, AI has some really positive and important applications, but I think we need to be aware of all of these ways in which AI is, just perpetuating the climate crisis. Some of those numbers were staggering. When I was doing this research, I just couldn't believe AI was using 6 times the water of a country. That's something we definitely need to be aware of as we continue to use it and scale it.
You mentioned a lot of these, really staggering statistics. I think something that could be beneficial for this conversation and for our listeners is to talk about how that trickles down to the human level. Essentially, what are the stakes to this kind of consumption and production? People evoke different moral frameworks about talking about these stakes. Some of the conversations we've had as a group that I found really productive are about how Catholic social teaching intersects with this kind of consumptive behavior. Perhaps share some thoughts about that from your perspective and in your research. What are the stakes of this? Perhaps how do we judge this morally?
So I'll start off. The climate crisis, just in general, does have immense scientific for individuals all across the world in the sense that when global temperatures are rising and sea levels are rising, taking away people's homes, that's taking away people's livelihoods. And so that's definitely a consideration that we can't forget as we're having this conversation. And that's why it's been at the forefront of so many people's minds. When also just looking at it through this Catholic social teaching lens, we see Pope Francis in Laudato Si talk all about the cry of the poor and how the environmental crisis is impacting the poor. The climate crisis really does especially impact those who are less advantaged and less privileged. And it's perpetuated by those with the resources and money. This is a theme that we see with AI as well. The traditional people being affected most by the climate crisis are not the ones using artificial intelligence in their day-to-day lives. We need to keep in mind the moral and ethical implications of that. And that's partially up for us to decide at an individual level, but Catholic social teaching does tell us that we should definitely evaluate that impact.
Thank you for that. It's a very interesting and ongoing conversation. Like you said, it's individually very idiosyncratic, right? Different people have different takes on that. We talked here about the poor, about how this is trickling down onto a human level. If we climb that pipeline back up to the top, big tech companies are now starting to recognize their carbon footprints, perhaps take accountability for that in various ways as calls for transparency and accountability increase. What are some of the ways that big tech companies bear this responsibility? We've started to see companies like Google and Microsoft invest in their own nuclear power plants to prepare for this increase in consumption and energy use. Reflecting on that, how are some of these big tech companies bearing that responsibility of energy consumption?
Yeah, so I think it's first just important to notice that Microsoft and Google, both of their carbon footprints have actually increased since 2019 and 2020, which was another thing I found surprising because I feel like since 2020 and 2019, the climate crisis has only become more of an issue, but it is mostly due to data centers and AI. I do think they bear a huge responsibility in making sure that we pave a more sustainable future. You mentioned nuclear energy. Clean energy is definitely a way in which the companies bear responsibility. We need to find clean energy that is readily available and cheap enough. It can be the go-to solution for companies scaling AI. Whether or not it's nuclear is still up for debate. If nuclear were the be-all end-all, then we would already be using it. While it is still in the testing phases, I don't think we can sit back and assume that's the solution. I think all of these big tech companies need to continue to invest in research surrounding clean energy and explore all these options. Additionally, they need to recognize it might be more expensive than fossil fuels to implement these clean energy practices, but ultimately, for so many reasons, that price can be worth it.
Thank you very much, Mary Claire. A lot going on. We heard from Aiden a lot of kind of big changes in what is possible in technology and things that some people are surprising, but for others already, we're getting used to AI being in so much of our life. You're pointing out that all that those changes lead to all these impacts in society that we're just starting to uncover in some ways, but they could have long-term implications. You've talked a lot about and thought a lot about regulation and whether we can control these concerns Mary Claire has brought up. Can you tell us some things about what's going on in the regulatory landscape and some of your observations and thoughts there?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a distinction to make between US focused regulations and regulations elsewhere. The EU passed their AI Act, and that's different from what's happening in the US. The US has had a much more balanced debate about whether regulation or innovation should be encouraged surrounding AI, and I think we can definitely expect to see that debate shift and continue as we go forward.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could say a little bit about you wrote this month about how the shift in the administrations in the United States may lead to different views about how to move forward in that balance between regulation and innovation.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we can expect to see with the Trump administration coming in a big shift away from the way that the Biden administration has approached AI regulation. President elect Trump has already said that he intends to reverse President Biden's executive order, which encouraged AI use, but with a lot of governance surrounding it. He's also made it clear that he thinks AI innovation is really important for America, specifically in competition with China. He thinks AI regulation needs to be limited so that companies in the US are able to compete on a global scale. Some authors I've been reading have even been calling it the new Cold War, this race to AI innovation and the best AI technology. So we can definitely look to see less regulations, most likely, in pursuit of AI innovation. You can also see that with the people he started appointing. A notable person, Aiden mentioned him earlier, is Elon Musk, has been announced to be part of the Department of Government Efficiency when Trump comes to office, which actually I think throws a bit of a wrench into what will happen with AI because Musk has both stated that there could be dangers to AI development while also developing his own AI. There's a lot to be seen in terms of a Trump administration with AI regulation, but it will definitely look different from Biden's in terms of pushing innovation.
Thank you, Claire. Let me open the floor to see if any of you have comments about things you've been researching lately or thinking about that you think it's important for our listeners and readers to have their eye out for. Maybe even some of the things you might have put in the read more or dive deeper section of your writing. Just raise your hand if you want to add or jump in.
I
That
can, I
fell
can
flat.
jump in. I can jump in.
All right, go ahead.
This month, even just this past week, you've seen OpenAI come out and say that they're seeking to potentially put some ads or use their software to create ads for revenue's sake. Their chief source of revenue has been investors, and yet they haven't actually followed through and given their investors too much, with the exception of creating the model. Their investors need to make money. So they try to shift to become a for-profit company. This could be the future of AI and how AI continues to remain profitable. But that's still left to be seen.
That's a really interesting evolution. We saw this with Google. At first, they made search, and it wasn't even clear what their revenue model was going to be. Then, over time, they converged on advertising. Facebook was the same way. They had to set up an organization inside to figure out how they were going to make money. And likewise, they ended up in advertising. So, if ChatGPT and OpenAI goes in that direction as well, then we'll have more big players in that very societally sensitive context of marketing and advertising and its relationship to consumption. Anybody else have any thoughts they want to share about some of the things they've been observing?
I'd actually like to hear from Claire about what she was saying toward the end of our discussion with her. With everything in flux between different administrations, with very different views about how AI should be regulated and whether or not it should be regulated at all. Could you speak about the stakes of bad governance or no governance over AI, perhaps citing some of the examples that we've seen over the past 2 years of the Wild West of AI, as we sometimes call it?
Thanks for that question, Graham. There are very real dangers to having a Wild West approach to AI. A really easy example of this is deepfake. That's the technology that allows for artificial intelligence to manipulate images, videos, even speech to look or sound exactly like a person. And they have become very realistic to the point that you cannot tell that they are created by artificial intelligence. Politically, there's political disinformation, and that's something I wrote about in my spotlight article about the election, the possibility of deep fakes causing political disinformation. There's also there's very high stakes. Something that Mary Claire wrote about in one of our recent newsletters was that children in grade schools have been using deepfakes to bully each other. If kids are able to misuse this technology in inappropriate ways, it can be used against kids in awful ways. And so, really, the stakes are very high when it comes to regulations, and it's not something that we should throw around lightly. And that's why this conversation is very important. Innovation is good because it provides economic benefits, security on the global stage. It provides us with a lot of good things, but it also can lead to a lot of bad things with bad actors. So we definitely need to pay attention to the regulations.
Yeah, that's really helpful for people trying to navigate moving forward. Like you said, that balance between innovation and regulation, adding that bigger picture stakes, maybe some moral weight is really an important first step before picking a camp or committing to one or the other, as eventually we will have to all start doing. Thank you for that.
I just want to thank everybody for their awesome work on the blog, which you can find on LinkedIn in the New AI Project. Search New AI Project and click to follow that project, and you'll get updates about the blogs and the weekly updates about things that we're paying attention to. In closing, we just want to do a quick round robin about some of the things that we're excited about for the future. Of course, as you saw today, there's big change, there's big implications, and there's big need to think about how society is going to go forward together with this work. Let's close out with observation, something we've either seen or we're excited about in how AI is having a positive impact somewhere in our space. I'm going to go the same order. I'm going to start with Aiden. Aiden, what are you excited about?
Yeah, I think you see a lot of people now that it's, like Claire said, more a part of the kind of what people are doing. It's a part of the atmosphere. People are trying to figure out ways to use it well, and especially in my life, people using it to create fun topics to talk about with friends, to prompt dialogues and fun different games that are unique enough where it's not the typical two truths and a lie for a conversation, but something that's really sparking close connection in the real world. I think this is a really good use case for people because it allows you to break up the typical routine nature of life and use a technology that's really good at generating cool ideas to enhance your connections with other humans.
What are you thinking about?
I've found that AI has eliminated this frustrating problem when you're either writing or speaking in conversation, and there's one word that you know perfectly captures what you want to say, but you can't think of exactly what it is. So you type into an LLM, what's that word for? And it's pretty darn good at fixing that frustrating problem.
Mary Claire, what are you thinking about?
This is looking at AI from a broader perspective, but one application that I found really inspiring is how it's being used in healthcare. We can see that AI is now being used to detect cancer, which is not something that we would have expected just a few years back. Some of these AI models are actually outperforming humans at detecting things like breast cancer, which I think is a really positive use case that could help so many people going forward.
Thank you. Graham?
I've been thinking about how AI is impacting people with disabilities, whether it's real-time accessibility information. I've seen this play out on the world stage with translation technologies in the past. The ways that AI is providing real-time accessibility information is bringing people together in a really exciting way.
What I'm really excited about is young people like yourselves that are both excited about technology, but also critically thinking about what's the best way to roll it out in society so that we all benefit and move forward together in a way that matches our vision for the goodness and the common good of society. Thanks to all our speakers today. See them online in the new AI project on LinkedIn and here at ThinkND. Thanks for your time and sharing the journey.